Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today, I'm joined with Bre Brown, who is the founder of Modern Manifestation and also the host of the Modern Manifestation podcast. Bre, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to this conversation. I said before we actually hit recording, we probably could have recorded a really good, pre-podcast conversation there, but we'll get to all that and let our listeners in on that as well. But before we get started, just introduce yourself to my listeners a little bit, in your own words. Who is Bre today?
Such a loaded question. Bre today is someone that has had a decade's worth of experience in commercial real estate brokerage, working with C-suite and executive teams on some massive real estate decisions. And that has really influenced what I've created with Modern Manifestation, which is a platform where I really just help people hone in on their identity, your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, if you will, that really create your life. I believe that your personality is what creates your personal reality. It's kind of the easiest and most simplistic way to describe what I do. And so with Modern Manifestation, it's primarily a podcast platform now. It's something I do on the side. And then I also do take coaching clients every once in a while. It's not my focus of my business, but it is something that I enjoy doing because it brings me fulfillment to really share the messages and the knowledge I've learned from having worked with these executives who've created multiple $1 billion businesses and then really allowed that to influence the information I'm able to share with people and then help them create more authentic, fulfilled lives. So that way they can just be better members of society and happier people.
I love that. I love that. And, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show and I reached out to you is, you know, in your profile, you talk about, working in a male dominated industry and something that
Mhm.
I witnessed firsthand growing up. My mom worked in a lot of male dominated industries. She worked in the construction industry for a while. She started her own landscaping business for a while. And, I witnessed firsthand, men telling her, pretty much to get out of the way because
Mhm.
she didn't know what they knew, sort of thing. And just that
Yeah.
battle, this is going back in the early and mid 1980s, so we've made some progress, yes, but I know we're still not there. So I always love connecting with, women who work in those male dominated industries. I do a lot of stuff with female sports and, girls playing baseball as opposed to softball and stuff like that. So I thought
Mhm.
there was a real connection there. And then, obviously when we pre-recorded, um, you talked about some experiences as to why you wanted to be on the show, about you doing your own solo traveling, almost a kindred spirit of my mother, I believe. um, so let's before we get into the manifestation part, let's talk a little
Sure.
bit about that solo traveling that you did, and just how that really shaped you into the person you are today.
Yeah, I would start off by saying that I think every young person or every person in general really should have an experience where they either leave everything behind and go travel in an RV or leave everything behind, get on a plane and just go live somewhere abroad for months on end on your own. It is such a empowering decision to make, an experience to have. So what I did is I was studying in college, I was studying architecture at the time, and I realized that architecture was not the path for me. And I was also paying for school by selling Cutco knives, if you've ever heard of those. So I was one of those kids calling you up, trying to sell knives to help pay for school. And all of my peers were going to study abroad. That was not something I could afford. I was paying for school myself. Studying abroad was just a really expensive endeavor. So what I did instead is I worked side jobs, I sold my knives, I saved up money, and I bought myself a plane ticket to go to Italy. And while I was there, the only way for me to live economically was to volunteer and work on farms. When you did that, you got free room and board. It was a program called WOOF. It's still around today. So I did that. I packed up my backpack. I went alone, didn't invite any friends, just got on a plane, showed up on a farm, and started working. And I loved it because my family was farmers. And so it was, in a way, homey to be there, also really rewarding to get your hands dirty, etc. But more than anything, it really allowed me an experience to be on another continent without a single person I knew. And that really tests your character, I talk about manifestation, really your identity. Who are you when you're abroad and no one knows who that person is, that version of you? Really having to cultivate that and then figure out, well, who am I without my family, without my peers, without my friends, whatever it is. Who am I when I'm placed somewhere entirely new where they have no concept or no bias as to who I'm supposed to be, whose sister I am, whose daughter I am, etc. So it was a really rewarding experience being able to be planted in that situation. And then also at that point, there weren't a whole lot of, this was about 10 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of independent women solo travelers. And so there were unique experiences associated with that. And me having to really make sure I could trust myself and my gut, my intuition. Because if you didn't, you could have your put yourself in somewhat scary predicament. You didn't. And so that is, I think, what kind of really sparked this whole manifestation thing for me, is because I started to learn when to listen to that gut feeling, that and then how that's influenced me in business as well. And then hearing these executives talk about how they're listening to a gut feeling that they had, and all of that just kind of snowballed into what I talk about today. But that was really the experience that I had. I loved it. It really shaped who I am today, because now I can always feel comfortable and confident that no matter what, I will always be okay. Because I have lived out of a backpack for months on end with two pairs of pants, two shirts, one pair of shoes, and gorilla glue. In the event the sole of my shoe started coming undone, like I had to figure it out. And I lived that way for a long time and I was okay. And so if anything, it really just taught me that I will always be okay. It doesn't matter how much money I have, how many items I have, what my shelter looks like. I can always figure it out. And having that sense of confidence, that foundation, is what I think really allowed me to be successful in business and also just in life, because that kind of helps remove some of that scarcity mindset. When you're like, it doesn't matter if I have nothing, I will still be okay. There will still be people in my life that can help me. There will still be a sense of community. And having gone abroad and having to build that community completely from scratch, I was able to do it. I was like, well, if I could do that there where I knew no one and there was a language barrier, then how can I not do that here in my own life? If everything were to disappear, I feel confident that I could recreate that again. And that, I think, that mindset of having that, it's a foundational thing. Now I can go into business and say, okay, I've never done this. I didn't even study business in school. I studied architecture. How the hell am I going to have conversations with these people and, quote unquote, fake it till you make it? And it's like, you know what? It's okay because I've done this. I've done this with a language barrier. I've done this with nothing really to my name. It's going to be fine. We'll figure it out as we go. And so I think that's what that experience really allowed me to cultivate. And it's why I think everyone should at least give themselves the gift of that experience, even if it's only for a month or a few weeks or whatever it is. I think it can be extremely empowering and a great tool for you to utilize later in life.
I love that. I love everything about that. And I'm a huge fan of kids taking a gap year between high school and college, between their freshman year of college, because man, like you don't know what you want to do at that stage. I mean, you
No.
want to do, like I went to a trade school to become a recording engineer, thought I'd become a record producer. Funny thing is now 30 plus years later, some of that knowledge is actually helping me in the editing of podcasts and stuff like that, which is kind of funny. But I never took that path. And, I'm actually, we're having conversations right now with our one grandson who's a senior in college, and he is about 80%, 85% sure that he's going to take a gap year. He just bought a Jeep and he's going to convert it into kind of a quasi camper and travel around. And like you said, what you learn and with that experience, I mean, we still do a lot of volunteer work, and that sense of community like you talked about is so important when you're out there and you're getting dirty with people and just working hard for you know 6, 7, 8 hours a day, whatever it is, maybe longer. Like you just build that sense of community, and it's those life experiences, I think, teach us more than any classroom or any online course ever could. So how old were you again when you did that? Were you done with college, or you were still in college when you decided to take that journey?
I was done with college. So I did it after my senior year of college. It was the summer right after. So that was about 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I must have been like 20, 21, somewhere in that range.
Yeah. And I mean, I just think that is just, such a bold and just smart move. And, obviously has benefited you now well into adulthood. So, obviously you did it after college, but what are your thoughts on, kind of that concept of a gap year? I mean, society and
Mhm.
guidance counselors and all this stuff, like they're all telling these kids, hey, jump in, go to 4 year school. You're going to put yourself a couple hundred grand in debt, and then you're right into the rat race
Love
at
it.
that point. So, what are your personal feelings? Like if you had to do it over again, would you have done it before college, or are you still okay that you had the college experience before you went and did that?
You know, I'm one of those people. I feel like everything happens for a reason in the way that it's supposed to happen. So I would not change my own experience because I think that I don't know that I personally, from a maturity perspective, was ready for it right after high school. I also don't think I had the confidence to actually say yes to that opportunity. However, if you are and you're finishing up high school and you're ready for that, absolutely jump in. I mean, I think that could be so critical. And you're right, right? College is so expensive these days. I know because I was still paying for it after the fact for many, many years. And so it's one of those things where whenever I went abroad after college, it really opened my eyes to what I wanted my life to look like in the future. And my unique experience was having been in Italy working on those farms. It was a beautiful experience being able to talk to some of those people about the American ideologies. And it allowed me to get an understanding of, okay, well, do I want that hustle and grind culture where I'm working 7 to 7 and bragging about how late I stayed in the office to my friends? Or do I want to create a life that has more fulfillment baked into it? And if so, that'll allow me to have more flexibility. And so for me, it was a wonderful experience, even though I'd already paid for my degree in architecture, not going to ever use it. I could have saved that money by not having done that and being able to direct myself toward either a trade or the degree that would have been helpful for me. So I can see how a gap year would be critical in helping you figure out, at 18 years old, I had no idea. I just threw architecture because it sounded cool and I loved looking at buildings. And I didn't really know that that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't really figure that out until junior, senior year of college. I was like, well, this isn't it. So too late, you're too far into the program. So a gap year would really eliminate, I think, a lot of stress in helping you figure out when you are separate from your parents, when you're separate from the society and the community in which you grew up in, who are you on your own? What are the things that you want separate from the people that raised you? And I think that could create a beautiful moment for you to experience that and figure that out for yourself, having that autonomy. And that could really direct what you do afterward. And maybe then you decide college isn't the route for you. And that's totally fine. I think a lot of people are making that decision now. I think if I were to go back in time, I probably wouldn't go to college. I look at what I do now. I'm like, I do not use my degree at all. I mean, it's something I can put on a resume, but other than that, it's not something I utilize. And I think that you can learn so much more from having that independence and autonomy, that ability to really support yourself. I think there's more to be learned in that than any college experience.
Yeah, I agree completely. And like you said, it's funny. We've created this culture here in America where, again, it's like, oh yeah, I worked, 80 hours last week. I worked 70 hours last week, and I was the same way. And for me, I could justify it in my mind because I was doing good work. I was working with kids, working, in a nonprofit organization that I had founded. So I did for many years. I wore it as a badge of honor that I had, worked 90 or 100 hours, one week at our sports complex, and it was kind of through, me taking a couple of, solo trips in a car back in 2019 where I realized there was more, and it was time for this new chapter. And at first, I did not embrace it, because again, the work that we were doing was incredibly fulfilling. It was, changing kids' lives. But there was that voice just saying, it's time for a new chapter. It's time to move on. And again, at that point in my life, I mean, this is something I had done for, literally 60% of my time on earth at that point. I dedicated to this organization. Um, but it was like, no, there's more. And it was, those trips that I took by car was kind of an aha moment of, me figuring out, wow, all right, finally, all these years after my mom had passed away, like I thought I kind of knew why she did what she did on her solo travels. And it was like, but no, now I really, really understand it. And you know, best decision we've ever made to, do what we're doing now. I mean, you can tell right now I'm not actually in the RV. I am in a house. We're in our niece and nephew's house right now to record this. But yeah, getting out there and getting on the road and just meeting new people and learning more about yourself and them is just so important. So how did that help you come to the understanding of how manifestation works? And I know a lot of people um, that might end up listening to this are going to think that manifestation isn't real, that you cannot do this, that it's
Sure.
woo woo sort of stuff. But I certainly don't believe that, and I know you don't believe that. So how did you come to really understanding how manifestation works and how to get it working for you positively?
Yeah, it's it's been a long journey for me, and I would say that spirit, source, universe, whatever you want to call it, started laying nuggets for me during my trip in Italy, because there were moments where miraculous things happened that I couldn't explain. And for me, that's what laid the foundation for this. I didn't even know what manifestation was at that point, but I'll never forget there was a moment in Rio Maggiore, and it started pouring down rain, and I was supposed to catch a flight at 7:30 in the morning. And here it was, 5 a.m. I was trying to get on the train to get to the airport. And this little town had one taxi, by the way. So if you don't catch the train, it's kind of good luck getting to your destination. And so because it started pouring rain, the tunnel flooded and the train wasn't able to come to Rio Maggiore. So I couldn't get to the airport. Called the taxi driver. He's like, "It's my birthday. I'm not working today." And I was like, "Well, happy birthday. And would you be willing to do me a huge favor?" And he's just like, "No," and hung up. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to get to this town? It's 30 minutes away by car. There's no way I'm running there, because it did cross my mind. And so I was like, well, some way, come hell or high water, I have to figure this out. I have to get there. I'm not missing my flight. I've already spent money on it. And once I get to that destination, I have another connecting flight. So I started thinking about, as someone fresh out of college, how much money I was going to lose if I couldn't get to my destination. And I was just like, you know what? I don't care. We're going to figure it out. We're going to somehow get there in the next 30 minutes. We're just going to have to make it work. And so I just started walking, and I was like, we're going to get there. And I had like this determination. And the street of this little town, there's one main street. There was no one on it. And I was probably out there for half an hour in this rain, didn't see anyone. All of a sudden, as I like make this decision to start walking down the street, figuring it out, the one car I've seen all morning pulls by. I stop them, and it's a couple, and they have a baby seat in the back seat. And I was like, okay, they're not murderers. They have a baby. And, I'm doing this assessment in my head, like, is this safe as a young woman alone traveling? It's a couple. That made me feel better. So I feel like it was, Spirit's way of being like, I'm going to give you the best case scenario so that you can feel safe and comfortable riding with these people. So two people, not just one, baby seat in the background. They looked very kind. And so I'm running through this checklist, and then I asked them in my broken Italian if if they're going to the town that I'm trying to get to. And they're like, yeah, we work there. And I asked if they could stop me by drop me off at the airport. And they're like, oh yeah, we work right across the street. Come on in. And they and dropped me off. And afterward I got in the train, and your adrenaline, your heart's pumping, you're so nervous about being late. I finally sat back on the plane and was like, oh my God, I just got in a random car with some strangers for half an hour in the pouring rain, and they just took me to my destination, and they just happened to be on the road. And as I was talking with them in the car, they were telling me how they're normally not on that road at that time of day, but something happened and they had to off their little girl with her grandma's at her house in Rio Maggiore, and they actually live in the other direction. And so this is something very rare for them. And I was like, all of the things had to align for that to happen at that exact moment for me. And so that was kind of like the first instance I ever had where something crazy like that happened. And I was like, that was weird. And then years go by and more of these kind of things happen to me over time. And I don't really think anything of it. I just start getting coined by my friends as a lucky person. And so it was years later, I saw the documentary The Secret. I don't love The Secret, to be totally honest. I think it's a little too simplified. I think that it creates a very pretty sounding picture, but it's not the reality a lot of us live in. I think too many of us have our emotional baggage that can get in the way. And so what I've really learned with manifestation over time is I think about it as your personality creates your personal reality. So what do I mean by that is your manifestation is the life you create is based on the identity you hold about yourself. And so earlier we were talking about traveling and how that allowed me to reassess my identity, the type of person that I am, the type of experiences that I have. Your identity at the core of it all is your thoughts, which create emotions, which could then create your behaviors. You can change your thoughts, you change your emotional response and your behavioral response. So if you can change your thoughts to be more positive, you're more likely to do the more healthy and productive behaviors as a result of that. That is going to create a different reality for you. That's what you can look at as in manifestation, its most basic terms. If you don't want to get on board with the spirituality of it, fine. You don't have to. If you can believe that your thoughts are very intrinsic to how we operate as people and the things that we do, is a positive thought going to make you more likely to binge Netflix or to maybe do the one thing you've been postponing that might actually really help you in your career? Or, maybe you apply for that job instead of going and scrolling social media. A lot of times our thoughts and our emotions dictate how we operate in our world. And that's really what we're cultivating more of. So that's the way I look at manifestation from the perspective of, and I'm someone where I've had a very interesting spiritual journey. I was raised as Lutheran, went through a period of my life where I was atheist for a bit, then a period of my life where I was agnostic. Now I'm someone that I feel has a deep sense of spirituality, but I wasn't always here. And so I'm able to look at it from the perspective of I've been there. I've had those beliefs. This is how I viewed manifestation for a long time. Now I have a different sense of manifestation in that all of those things are still true. And there's also a component to it in my mind that at some point you have to be willing to let go of the logic a little bit. It's sort of that leap of faith mentality. And the amazing thing is when you embrace that and you just allow it to happen, wonderful things start occurring. Another story I have, I love to tell this story, and it just because it sounds so untrue. It's something where if I ever heard this, I'd be like, made that up. But I'll never forget. This is kind of silly, but I was in San Diego and visiting my brother who's in the military over there, and we were all on the beach of Coronado having a good time. And my Fitbit broke, and I was very upset about it because I was in a competition with some friends. That this is when Fitbits were like really popular and everyone was competing and whatever else. And I was annoyed by it. And I was like, you know what? I don't know that this whole manifestation thing is real, but let's test it. I'm a huge person of like, let's set up an experiment and see if it proves itself. I was in that point in my life where I kept testing manifestation over and over and over again. I was like, if they find a way to get me a new Fitbit by the end of the day, that'll prove to me that this thing exists. I loved to do those kinds of things. And sure enough, the family and I, we all go out into the ocean and we're having a good time. And I found something. And I'm not kidding when I say I lifted up with my foot and it's a Fitbit in the exact same model that I was already wearing, and it worked. And I went to the lifeguard and was like, has anyone reported a missing Fitbit? Tried to find its owner for the rest of the afternoon and had no success. And finally I was like, okay, I'm thinking this is just a gift from whatever's out there and trying to tell me like, you need to get it through your thick head. This thing works. And so again, I've had numerous experiences with that. I'm one of those people that always wins the $500 gift card, that always wins this, that, and the other. I've used it with cold calling in my professional business life where, whenever I'm working on trying to generate more business, it's been effective for me. And so I've had enough evidence in my own life to be like, okay, at some point I just have to believe and not exactly know how it works, and also be okay with the fact that I don't know how it works. And I think at some point as humans, we just kind of have to either get on board with that or not. But I think it's really beautiful when you embrace the fact that there's going to be things you don't always know exactly how it operates, but knowing that it does and how much it's benefited me, I just want to pass along that knowledge for the people who are open to it and watch them create beautiful things as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, that faith is really what, for me really resonates. And I know, even for ourselves, we decided to start this, RV journey. Like, we had a plan. I had, all kinds of, consulting gigs lined up, and, all kinds of stuff that was all, related to the youth sports industry lined up for, to generate revenue while we were on this journey. And then COVID came and it all just disappeared, literally into thin air. But yet we still were like,
Yeah.
no, we're still going to do this. We're still going to do, we're going to put one foot in front of the other, and we're going to continue to just move forward with what we're planning on doing. And it's all going to work out. At the end of the day, it's all going to work out. And it truly has. I mean, even with, podcasting in general, I've been podcasting since 2012 because I did it for our organization. But every podcast interview I'd ever done, from 2012 to 2020, with the exception of one, was literally sitting face to face in front of someone having a conversation. So, one of the things that COVID forced me to do in, my podcasting world was to get accustomed to doing interviews virtually. I mean, I still love sitting down face to face and having a conversation and, clipping on the mics and talking to people that we, meet in our travels and, learning about their journeys as well. I mean, that is still one of the things that makes me tick more than anything as a human being. But, I had to get accustomed to this version of podcasting to, connect virtually. And what's really been cool about us traveling is that, there's probably close to a dozen people that I've interviewed who we then were able to connect with in person in our travels, which has just been so cool to be able to, kind of do the reverse, so to speak. And yeah, I think the key is just trusting the process, even though you don't understand it. Trust the process and, keep moving forward. But, we talked a little bit in the beginning about, one of the things that, drew me to having you on the show was, you talking about working in male dominated fields. What was that like for you initially, and how did manifestation help you navigate that?
Yeah. So initially for me, it was quite shocking to go into that world. I had mentioned before we hit record that I come from a family of women where none of them were in these industries. They were teachers and stay-at-home wives and receptionists, etc. And none of the women in my family that I know of have been in male dominated industries. However, I had all brothers and I was very much closer to my dad. And for me, it felt okay. And I also felt empowered going into something like that because of my experiences having studied abroad, not studied abroad, but traveling abroad. So I knew I could do it. And so going into the industry initially, I mean, this was a decade and more than a decade ago. It's been fascinating to see how much it's changed over the years, but I'll never forget my first year in business, being there were the clients that called you honey and sweetheart and told you the things you didn't know, even, as recent as a decade ago. So that was tough in the beginning. And what I realized is that there was a direct correlation to how I was being treated and how I went into those meetings and those business settings. And what I realized is that in the front end, we talk about like fake it till you make it is really a manifestation concept. It really is. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, how am I showing up that makes me seem more meek or not as confident, or how am I energetically and also physically just presenting myself in a way that maybe isn't communicating what I actually know in my value. And so I started making a shift going into each of these meetings, really just being like, you know what, we know our stuff. We're going to show up knowing as we know what we're talking about. We know exactly what they need to do. We're not going to allow them to push us around. This is the advice we're going to give them. This is how I'm going to also show up to make myself like feel more powerful in the way they're needed to dress, or the song I needed to listen to, whatever it was. When I shifted how I was going into the meeting internally, the meetings started shifting externally. And that's when the people started responding to me differently. And you can say that that is coincidence. Sure, could be. But I noticed I started playing with it after a while, right? I'm a perpetual experimenter. I started not getting the right mindset beforehand, seeing what happened, and then getting into the right mindset and seeing what happened, seeing what would happen in these meetings. Stark difference, huge difference in how people responded to me. And then also my success with the industry. I had a lot more success when I embodied the identity of someone who was confident and successful. So that's really how it impacted my business. And I would say that I would not have been successful without having those experiments, having that mindset, and then also sitting in these calls. And for I would say almost every business, your two most expensive costs are people and then your real estate. So I'm helping these people of Fortune 500 companies make massive real estate decisions on their second largest expense. And at the time, I was in my 20s. There's a certain feeling about being the only woman on the call and a woman in her 20s trying to tell a 50-year-old CEO who's been in the business for years what the real estate decision he should make. There was a at first when I was having the thoughts of like, well, who am I? That's when I had the negative responses. But when I was just like, no, you know what? I have trained with the best in the industry. I know my stuff. This is how I'm going to guide them. It doesn't matter my age, whatever. They were responding differently to me on those calls. And then what was fascinating is as I'm sitting there talking with them about these expenses and strategies, it became apparent to me that they were also practicing manifestation techniques. They would say things like, I have a gut feeling about this, or I'm going to believe that this is what's going to happen, and that's just going to make it a reality. And they weren't using the exact language that you would find in manifestation, but the things and the concepts and the ways that they were thinking about business was kind of like Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. I mean, all of that is manifestation, really, at its core. And so I started hearing about these really successful business owners and how they were utilizing it in their own lives. And I was like, wow, okay. This isn't just for the people that loved the documentary The Secret and caught on to it. This is something that people are actually utilizing day in and day out. And there is an element of faith. And it has been fascinating to cling on to that and allow it to create success for me in my business in a way that allows me to do so without the hustling, without the grinding. Not to say I'm not a hard worker, that's always going to be there, but it means that I'm able to be more effective and more productive in less time. And I don't care whether or not you believe in it or not, but if you want that kind of lifestyle where it can just be a little easier, why wouldn't you take it? It's kind of like, why wouldn't you just take that leap of faith?
Yeah. Yeah. And, working hard does not necessarily mean working long.
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
there is that misconception, again, especially in this country where, you've got to be, going on 4 hours sleep every night and, all that sort of stuff. And like I said, I did it. I did all of that. And that is not the way to go about life. That is not living at all. So yeah,
Right.
I love that. Um, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to bring up to the listeners?
I honestly feel like we pretty much covered everything that we're going to talk about. But if anyone is interested in learning more about manifestation from more of like the logical perspective, and as well as with the spiritual perspective, you can check out my podcast at Modern Manifestation.
And how else, other than the podcast, how else can they reach out to you if they want to have a conversation about anything that we've just talked about? Where can they find you on the web other than the podcast?
Yeah, Instagram is probably the quickest way to get a response from me. It's the same handle at Modern Manifestation. Otherwise, email is also available. We're just a little slower with email, and that's at hello at the modernmanifestation.com.
Awesome. So, Bre, that brings me to my final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places. It comes from the opening lyrics of the Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things, then the whole world changes. So what's one of the little things that Bre does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place?
I love this question. It's like little acts of kindness, which I do love. Something super small is every day my husband and I go to the coffee shop and I just always open up the doors and hold it for anyone that's walking into the coffee shop. Something super small, but people are always kind of caught off guard and smile and then letting them get in front of you in line. It's just kind of nice. Something to do early on in the day that, just makes you feel good.
I agree. I do that quite a bit as well. And it is, you see the reaction of people. It's like, hey, this guy's waiting to hold the door for me. Or yes, I love that. I love that answer. So, I really enjoyed this conversation. Get out in your area, I'll definitely look you up. Together at that coffee shop.
Yeah, please do.
Talk some more. But they're listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com or danclouser.com. While you're there, pick up a copy of my most recent book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1. Bre, thanks again for taking the time to be on the show. I really enjoyed this.